Pop, persuadable. What's going on, boo-boos? Do you guys actually know the #1 leading cause for dry skin? Towels. That's a dad joke, and I Googled that. So I wanted to come out with a video today. 30 minutes of just top lizard players utterly destroying survivors. We all know Lizard can be very difficult to use. Some people use him very well, especially on PC. And so for today's video, that's what we're going to do. We're going to watch some of these top players, these top lizards. And remember that if you see gameplay and you're like, oh, well, you know, that player didn't play so well, be a little mindful. These are top players, so they're playing against really good survivors. And sometimes hunters can have that effect on survivors. They make you overthink, or a hunter can kind of trick you out. You ever make a move where you're like, oh, why did I make that move? And this is a good example of such. One of the things that I've been doing is a lot of research. We got some big projects with NetEase coming up, so that's why I wanted to do a lot of research on all individual characters. We have restored the Reviewing Your Gameplay series. I don't think that I'm going to be coaching any specific team for Koa. It's too time consuming. And I think it's time that I retire those gloves. So, man, it's been a long 2 years with Identity V, going as a player, top player, then going to as a coach. Hopefully I did a good job with all of the players that I've been able to play with, including Call Me Duty, Schmitty, Docman. I still miss you, buddy. My Leg. Paul Blooms, Sprinter, the list goes on. 464. I mean, just amazing players. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I miss you. Hope that the NAEU. Hope we have some tournaments coming up, and I want to make sure that if I'm an MC, that I haven't lost my touch in regards to speaking about those sort of high tier strategies. I think something that I've been learning myself is, you know, not pretending like I have all the answers. That was one of my flaws when I first started coaching, is that you feel like this pressure, like you're supposed to have all the answers. And as a coach, that was a difficult thing to do, because there's players who will always know some characters better than you. There are players who really dedicate all their time to one specific character. And it's important that you listen to their feedback as well in regards to how you play these characters and how they should perform. That's a very important distinction. The other thing you got to be worried about, though, is that just because somebody plays a character all the time, that doesn't always mean that they have all the correct tendencies, and that's where coaching comes into play, right? Being an Identity V coach, you can only be a coach if your team members and if your brothers and sisters who are on your team have the humility to not think that they're gods. You know, the greatest athletes in the world, they still have good coaches. It doesn't mean that the coach can be better than you or play better than you. It's about opening your mindset to their viewpoints and strategies and say, hey, I keep seeing you doing this. You should try this out. And that's the role of a coach. To a degree, in my humble opinion, I feel like that's the same thing as an MC. I think as an MC, you're the community's coach. You're trying to explain some of the things that are happening, and you don't always get it right. Sometimes people have creative strategies, or they use players or characters in a creative way that you've never seen before, which is why they're competing on an international stage, or a national stage for that matter, either one. So this is some gameplay, looking at Lizard, looking at how to play him, some of the things that I've been trying to experiment with and explore. The big thing is learning his personas on certain maps. One of the most popular builds for Lizard is definitely going north and south. Some of the best Lizards out there use peepers, and I tried that, but I realized that there was a lot of improvement that I needed, and that I was actually winning more with blink. So watching a lot of these high tier players, you see some of them using blink, and I'm like, oh, well, that makes me feel better about myself. So with Lizard, we're going to talk about some Lizard strategies, everything that I've been able to accumulate. I've spoken with many top Lizard players. I've watched a lot of top Lizard players. I still refuse to come out with a guide for him. I don't think that that's my role. I think it could be one day, but I don't think there's still strategies that I'm figuring out with him. My character on NAEU is between, I think between 6,000 and 8,000 character points. So I change my character name up every 10 days, and I have multiple accounts just because if people know who you are, then they want to play friendly or or they troll you. So I kind of like being anonymous when I play in the game. And the big thing is changing up his persona build based on the map. Some maps have more palettes, some maps don't. Some maps I have to have trumps cards, so I know I can switch to teleport later in the game using detention. Most builds for Lizard, though, they all have detention. I've been messing around with the reduced fear radius on him, 15%. It's actually not doing too bad right now, so it's constantly going back and forth in regards to which persona I want to try with him. Sometimes I use trumps cards, sometimes I just go north and south, depending on the map. And you're going to see a lot of these same sort of mind tricks. One of the things that Lizards do, what's interesting is that even though I'm winning less with Lizard as I climb up the ranks, I'm having more fun because the survivors are better. And what I mean by that is that, don't get me wrong, I get super annoyed when I lose, which is going to happen as a Lizard main. I get so, they have to include a new feature where you just automatically get kicked out of post chat. Because, man, I'd be, so, like, after every match I lose, man, I got, like, some shit that I want to say, and I'll be like, no, Persuadable, you're a grown man. Don't do that. Anyways, so I've been experimenting with up and down builds a lot. I've been experimenting with faster attack recovery. I've been experimenting with part of a north build where I decrease acceleration when I'm 12 meters away from the chair. One of the nice things about Lizard is really if you have the ability to hit them far away from the chair, and then you can follow up with a jump because you either hit them again or you can hit them with your jump. So decreasing that acceleration, it's a weird build. Instead of just constantly going north and south, sometimes I am going south and east, and then I'm building up towards a few other things. But these are some of the best Lizard players, and it's a good way to really look at him and feel how other people are playing him and understanding why people play him differently depending on whether they're using peepers or whether they're using blink or whether they're using trumps card or, And just because one Lizard does it doesn't necessarily mean you need to. But one of the things that I was talking about before is that now that these survivors are a lot better, now that I'm in the higher tiers again, I like it because you can actually play mind games. You go up and let's say if somebody runs through a pallet and you jump up and then you immediately fall down on the same side of the pallet that you were initially on, and you see them run back through the pallet towards you and you get an easy hit. That's something that only happens in higher tiers. A lot of low tiers, they just run straight. And so Lizard in the lower tiers, the mid tiers, was more like I was learning how to control my jumps, learning how to pan my camera downward, learning how to, my finger placement on the screen so I can really make those turns. And then thankfully the sensitivity came out, so now I can turn my camera better in the sky, and I'm getting better at the jump. So I felt like that was the role of low to mid tiers. I actually wouldn't recommend trying to learn Lizard in high tiers because I feel like it was nice playing Lizard from a low tier perspective because it really shows me how different survivors kite at different levels. And it also reminds me of how I can calibrate my gameplay. also not being the best lizard player in the beginning, it was nice to play other players who were still learning the game or who didn't have, maybe a 4-man comp. So if you're going to play him, I really recommend starting from the bottom with him and really learning. It takes a lot of time. It takes a real long time to learn how to use lizard in his camera, to learn your placement of your hands, right? Because there's specific places that your left hand needs to be in order to move in the air. This is the number 9 lizard, by the way, over in China. And yeah, so now that I'm going to the high tier, it's actually funner. I know I've been ranting about this for a while. I do apologize, but it is a 30-minute video, so give me a little bit of a slack here. But anyway, so it felt more one-dimensional, though, in the lower to mid tiers. It had its purpose, but it felt very one-dimensional. A lot of characters pretty much kite the same way. They just keep running straight. They keep running forward. And now that you get to these higher tiers, they're trying to pull more fancy tight kiting tricks. You can have more mind games. You can really make a high tier look incredibly dumb by doing some silly jump. And like I said, with that pallet analogy, which, by the way, it's not the survivor's fault. You're just playing mind games. And it makes it a very much so more enjoyable experience playing him. Difficult, though. Very difficult. Because a lot of survivors will... they know how to kite. They're good. They know what to do. So I think that once you start hitting those higher tiers with lizard, you will have the inclination of just wanting to stop. It's very difficult as a lizard. I mean, even if you play well, you'll get a lot of ties, depending on if you play good or depending on if there's a moment where you get kited for a long time. That's why I started using blink. I felt like I didn't have enough mind games in my toolbox in order to only rely on peepers. Peepers is a great trait. You should absolutely use it if you're a high caliber player. But I looked at it and I'm like, there were so many instances where if I just had my blink, I would have been able to down somebody significantly faster. So that's why I started using blink, because my mind games aren't necessarily there, because transitioning from those low to mid tier kiters to the high tier kiters, and the high tier kiters who are there because they play a lot, or the high tier kiters who actually don't really know how to kite a lizard. I always make that statement. It's like you're playing it's like you're playing a game of chess with somebody else who's playing the game of checkers. So you're doing all these complicated analysis, sort of, what is this survivor going to do? And the survivor just simply has no idea what the fuck to do, so they just run straight. So then you jump up in the air and you land down on the same side of the pallet, and the other survivor is just standing there. They have no idea what the hell you're doing. And they're like, why'd you do that? They don't understand what you're trying to do because they don't understand lizard, because not a lot of people play Lucino. So that's what can get really difficult with him. What I will say is that although there is going to be a very, very frustrating phase when you start going against really good survivors, you just got to keep doing it, and you just got to stick with it. And you have to remember that even tying as a lizard, it's, in my opinion, an accomplishment. He's not a meta hunter. So you got to rewire your brain. You're not trying... I mean, I know that there's lizards out there who are amazing. They have 70% win rates. But they've been practicing for many seasons with him. So the thing is just that you got to go easy on yourself. You got to go easy on yourself. And if it's getting frustrating, don't quit. Just take a break from the game for that day. I've really been enjoying Lizard, though. I really have been. I feel like I'm predicting survivors much better. The sensitivity that came out, ladies and gentlemen, if you're unaware of what I'm talking about, in the recent update, you can actually change his sensitivity when you're in the air. And I know some popular Luchinos will do 100 for vertical and then 70 for horizontal. The reason why they do that is because they're so used to playing Luchino that putting horizontal, which is left to right, so that's your ability to look like just spin in a 360 in the air with your camera. A lot of them don't do that, or 180 usually. A lot of them don't like it at 100 because they're so used to playing Luchino. I actually have my sensitivity settings at 100 and 100. And I like it the most that way because I can do a 180 very, very easy. So I can jump to, so what I'll do with some survivors is I'll go and I'll jump over a pallet and then immediately 180 back and jump the other way and boom, easy hit. So what I can tell you from my experience with Lucino is that if you really dedicate a lot of time to him, you're really going to understand movements, but you're going to understand where the survivors are going. You're going to understand the games that they're trying to play just by their movements. I think one of the competitive advantages that I had to picking up somebody like Luchino is that I've been a top hunter before. So a lot of the times I know the route. So if you're new to the game and you're not familiar with the routes, then that's going to be very difficult for a Luchino. Your game expertise and your ability to understand transitional kiting and tight kiting and the major routes, it's almost paramount for Luchino. You know, there's other characters where you can kind of get away with that, right? Like Ripper. Ripper, you don't always need to worry about that sort of stuff. There's not as much. You have to worry about prediction in regards to tight kiting so you don't miss your foggy blade. That's different. But in terms of hitting your jumps, I mean, there's times where I have a survivor on Red Church. I will include it in this gameplay. I'll include one of my gameplays in here. And there's a survivor who's 3 jumps away from me on Red Church. And the only reason why I hit him is because I know exactly where he's going to go. And when you see that gameplay, you can try to say, well, the survivor should have known, but not really. Not when you're surrounded by walls, 5 or 6 different walls, and I hop over all of them and I come crashing down. It's very difficult. I think the hardest thing for me is Lucino. We've talked about this a lot. I think the hardest thing for me was really learning how to pan my camera down, and I'm finally getting better at it. I'm starting to get better at it, and that's your ability to see below you, right? So when you jump up in the air, you put your camera downward so you can see below you. A lot of people don't do it. A lot of people, they just jump straight, and I have plenty of footage of me doing that. And it's not good because you really have to look below you, because when you're jumping, a lot of high-tier survivors will run backwards. Right? So say if they're running north and you go to jump, they'll immediately juke back to south. And if you're not looking underneath your feet while you're in the air, you're going to go crashing north when this person already started jetting south. So it's a difficult thing, and it was very hard for me to learn it. The other thing that so I consider this this is my gameplay, by the way. One of the things that I've been really trying to learn. I've been taking a lot of notes. Poor guy. I've done that before. I've been in that prisoner's shoes before. Anyways, one of the things that I've been trying to work on with Lucino is specifically wondering when I should use my jump in the beginning of the game to catch up to a survivor versus when I should not jump and I should just walk and save my jump. And it all comes down to spawn points, right? So we know that for hunters and survivors, it is really, really important to understand spawn points. Where's the hunter? How to rotate? Where are the survivors? Where should I go? I just uploaded footage of the number 6 Chinese hunter, and we see that he goes inside a Sacred Heart Hospital on one of the spawn points. And I said that's surprising for sculptor mates because there's a lizard, a Luchino, we'd run around. So in a situation like this, the reason why I haven't came out with a Luchino guide is because, first of all, if I ever do, I don't know if I want to, but if I ever do, I want it to be one of the most advanced guides I've ever made. And talking about every single spawn layout and which areas I choose to immediately jump to close the gap versus some areas that I don't do that in because I need to save my jump. And that's because of the energy levels, right? If you start jumping right away, you can really have some crazy energy management issues early game. There's actually a risk when you jump early game like I did here. It also depends on where the cipher layout is. If you think of Arms Factory, right? This is I don't think I have an image, but think of Arms Factory by Shaq. You know that spawn point as a hunter where you're literally to the right of the shack, right? And if you go into no man's land, unfortunately, I think only some of the mid to high tier players are going to know what I'm talking about. But if you look at the Arms Factory, there's one spawn point for hunter that spawns immediately right of shack. And when you go into no man's land, it used to be called no man's land, there's a survivor there. And when there is no cipher at no man's land, that usually dictates whether I'm going to jump immediately. Because what happens is that a lot of survivors who are there, they tend to try to rotate towards shack in that corner. And so you can catch a lot of survivors off guard, especially with fear radius reduction. You can get really close to them. But then there's other times, such as Red Church, where if I spawn a little bit outside of Graveyard, in between Graveyard and Wedding, I don't like to jump all the time because there's a bunch of walls and I need to save my energy so I can play games with the survivors. So there's a consequence to jumping right away. And I realized that it really comes down to the spawn point. So with this gameplay footage here, with this game, when I immediately left Graveyard, I could see the survivor right there in Wedded. They didn't transition out. So when they didn't transition out, that was when I was like, all right, I'm going to use my jump because I know I can catch up to them. This is somebody who still hasn't learned that when you spawn Wedding, it can mean a lot of danger. So the thing is that when I'm learning Lucino, I don't want to just have from a basic standpoint, whether you should jump in the beginning of the match versus when you shouldn't jump in the beginning of the match. I feel like a lot of us, we just try to have an easy answer. Like, oh, no, you should never jump in the beginning of the match because we want you to save your energy. Or you should always jump to catch up to the survivor. I don't like that dichotomization. I'm trying to look for that specific answer for specific spawn points for specific cipher layouts. Red Church is one of them. Sacred Heart Hospital is one of them. I do think that Luchino needs a buff. We talked about that. I came out with videos on how you could consider buffing him. The sensitivity options was a good thing that the devs did. I think the energy management is just ridiculous with its current status. I talked about this in another video as well with Luchino. My issue with him having an energy bar, not the kind you eat, right? My issue with him having an energy bar is that although Spider technically has a variation of this and Mad Eyes has a variation of this, with Spider's ability, those spider webs are down there for a little bit. You can keep using them. With Mad Eyes, with the walls, they stay up for a little bit depending on where they are. Are they near an execute? Are they near a cipher, basement, etc.? So the point is that the walls can stay up and you can use one ability with another to chain connect, just like you can with Spider. So having some sort of energy makes sense. All right. But with Luchino, you can't. And that's my issue. All right. So here, by the way, real quickly. So here's what I'm talking about predicting survivors. Right here. And I'm looking down, or I was looking down. And he was either going to go there or right here where I'm going through that pallet. I'm a little delayed, by the way. So I was panning my camera down. So either direction that he went to, I probably would have hit him. And that's where that increased control over your jumps makes you feel much more comfortable in the air. And unfortunately, you're going to have to play hundreds and hundreds of matches to get there, but you'll get there. So like, for instance, watch this lizard. You see that he's not jumping, right? You also see him lagging. And this is, I'm surprised he'd go to Graveyard. I'm not saying it's the wrong move. This is the number 25 lizard. I'm just saying I'm surprised by it. Normally I probably wouldn't have wanted to come over here, but this is why I watch gameplay, because maybe graveyard's a strong area for him. Maybe it's not. Maybe my normal routes would be better. But we can see that there's times where he didn't jump in the beginning there. And I agree with that. If you're going to go to graveyard, you don't want to jump and then get transitioned on. So, you know, now that I think about it, actually, it may have been a good move, because a lot of high-tier survivors, they, with that spawn point that he had, a lot of them rotate towards Little Church, and they rotate around. So when you run into all of Broken Wall side, everybody except usually a mercenary is already transitioned. So that's something that I'm going to think about in the future, because at least when you go to graveyard like that, you immediately engage with somebody, because usually they don't transition from there. Huh. Gives me something to think about for sure. So we've talked about a lot so far in this video. We have talked about the sensitivity options, whether you should jump in the beginning or not. Most of the time I realize that jumping in the beginning of the match is not the thing to do, because you really cannot afford to lose your energy. So it's incredibly risky to do that. Very rare circumstances will I jump right away. And I don't mean to continue repeating myself. I do wish to be thorough and descriptive, instead of giving some bland comments that don't really have any full carryover. So like as an example, when this lizard went to graveyard in the beginning, can you imagine if he jumped? If he jumped, there's too many places the mechanic could have been. She could have been by any of those pallets. So then he just wastes a jump. But I don't think the idea that we should never jump. I think that there are times we should jump, especially on Sacred Heart Hospital. Depending on the spawn point. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm really looking into that in-depth detail. That sort of in-depth detail is what wins you tournaments, what wins you matches, what wins you games. And I wanted to share some of those thoughts with you. The culmination of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of matches, and the thoughts that I have about him, and how I look at him, and how I play him, and the things that I'm doing. That's kind of where I want everybody to be at, and to look at these characters in a unique way. It's kind of like the old school Spider. Once Spider was nerfed, we had to, well, she was buffed, and then she got nerfed, and the question is do you put your spider webs down right away? It's the same thought process. For those who weren't around in the game back then, Spider Queen used to be awful, and then she got a really good buff that made her pretty much one of the best hunters. I think the best spider I've ever seen play is Call Me Duty. Very, very good spider player. And then essentially what they did is they nerfed Spider Queen to make her webs. They didn't regenerate as fast. So you really had to tactically choose when to use your webs. And one of the old school things was to put your webs down right away so you can immediately engage with whatever survivor was closest to you. And there was no issue with it, because you would just regenerate your web and you could keep using them and destroy. But then after the nerf, we realized, wait, we can't put our webs down anymore. We just got to casually walk up to that survivor and then start laying the traps down. So that's where that thought process with Luchino. When should I jump to close the gap? Also depends on the survivor. So by the way, with some of these gameplays, there might be like few instances of lag, and if that happens, I do apologize. I don't mind if there's some instances of lag. I'll upload the footage, but you know, there's times where I have really great gameplay footage and it just gets completely ruined by the lag, so I can't really carry it over. Like right now, this dude's going to be walking through walls. But it should be brief. Pretty sure he's going to be able to down her in time. Look at that movement. Good movement. Anyways, this video is going to come to an end. I hope that you guys enjoyed this 30-minute video of Luchino's just kicking some ass. I think Lucino needed a little bit of love, and if anyone thinks about picking him up, maybe this video can help you with some of the things that I have learned and some of the ways that I'm looking at the character. And remember that his build will also change depending on which map you're on. They're not always going to be the same. And don't be afraid to explore. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for spending these 30 minutes with me. For anyone who was able to bear my voice this entire time. And watch some incredible gameplay from incredible Luchino players. You can see that all of them are really good. We have some of the top players. I got to see the number 1 Lucino play, and he didn't even bother winning. He just wanted to land his jumps. It was a really cool match, but I didn't end up saving the gameplay. On that note, I want you all to take good care of yourselves during this COVID-19 time. This is more of a relaxed video, more of a relaxed tone as we analyze a lot of the various aspects of Lucino. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. And by all means, if you're a Lucino main, feel free to share some of your wisdom in the comments. I'll definitely read them. You all have a beautiful day now. Bye-bye.